Day 6 is now in the bag in the Karen Reed trial, and it was a half day, so it wasn't a full day of testimony, but still some very interesting things that came out in today's testimony, mostly from Sergeant Michael Lank. Now, if you recall, in Day 5, which we had a video on yesterday, that at the end of Day 5, there was an offer of proof or voir dire, different ways to refer to what happened, but essentially the witness on the stand was Sergeant Michael Lank, and the jury was not present. This was not in the presence of the jury, and this was just an offer of proof to show the judge what type of questions are going to be asked of this witness, and not for the entirety of his testimony, but specifically as it relates to his altercation that he had with some individuals on behalf of his good friend Chris Albert. So some of those questions went on yesterday, and the judge was going to make a determination overnight about what type of questions into that specific instance are going to be allowed and which questions are not going to be allowed. So she did allow the defense attorney to ask a number of questions about that incident. There's only some very few details which she did not allow them to get into, but the rest was fair game. So a lot of that did come out. So we're going to be discussing that also in today's video, a little bit more of a deeper dive into the exact testimony of Sergeant Michael Lank. But first, we had to finish up with Sergeant Good. Now, the essential part, what happened with Sergeant Good today, was that he had a report. And this was the report that he authored. It has his name on it. And in that report, we discussed yesterday that there were some mistakes, and there's also some names that weren't as prominently displayed in the involved persons portion of the report. For example, Brian Albert's name coincidentally wasn't spelled out, first name and last name, and there's some other issues with that report. But today they discussed the cover sheet of that report, and on the cover sheet is very basic information: the date of the incident that the report is about, and some very basic details. Now, there's also a picture of some evidence that's on that cover page, and it's interesting that they pointed out that at one point there was one picture on that report, the cover sheet, and then all of a sudden that picture changed. And that picture changed into a picture of, wouldn't you know it, a piece of broken tail light, which was found at the scene, which Sergeant Good never even saw himself. So what they brought out on cross-examination was, this is your report. It's got your name on it, and the incident says the date of January 29th, 2022, right? That's when you responded. You went there, you collected some evidence, took some pictures, made a whole report, and now there's a picture on that report that you never took, and some other police officer must have taken that picture, and somehow it ends up on the top, on the cover sheet of your report. How did that happen? And the answer to that was, well, other police officers supplement details with the report. That's completely normal, even though it has his name on it. Still, other police officers can still supplement and add information, add evidence, add pictures. And for some reason, which he doesn't understand quite why it happened, that picture, which was added later by a different police officer, somehow ended up on the cover sheet of that report. So, I don't know. Interesting fact how the picture suddenly changed. And again, remember, all of the first responders didn't see any broken taillights at the scene. That was discovered later, and we're going to discuss that also in the testimony of Sergeant Michael Lank. All right, so that was brought out really with Sergeant Good. Now let's move on to Sergeant Michael Lank. And something that I always talk about, and it's so important, and again, this was something that the prosecutor did not do in this case, and I think that it's a big mistake, and that is the following. When you know that negative information is going to come out against your client. So if you don't know, so then obviously you're not going to bring it up. You don't know if whether the defense attorney knows about this information, and you don't know if he's going to be able to bring it up. Maybe you'll make an objection. But here, very clearly, this altercation that happened, where Sergeant Michael Lank came to the defense of his good friend, Chris Albert, the judge made a ruling before the witnesses started before the day of trial started, before the jury was called in. She made a ruling that the defense attorney is allowed to discuss that incident. And you know, as the prosecutor, that the defense attorney is going to bring up that incident. So what should you do as the prosecutor? All of you who are followers of the channel, maybe you're trial lawyers, maybe you're not, but what should you do if you're in that situation? The answer is that you, as the prosecutor, bring that out. And you give the witness the time to explain why this negative information is coming out. Give it a twist that's going to be favorable to your side. You know it's coming, and you know that the way the defense attorney is going to bring it out is not going to be favorable to your side, right? So you get to go first. You're directing the witness. You bring out the negative information and try to give it as much of a positive twist as you can. And let the witness explain, because the witness is not always going to be allowed to explain when the defense attorney is cross-examining him. And that many times that happens. When you're cross-examining a witness, you don't want the witness to explain. You want yes or no answers. So you give leading questions, and you just want to make certain points. You don't want to give them opportunity to explain their answers. And that's actually what happened in this case as well. I think this was Sergeant Good, when he was on the stand, there was some cross-examination that was going on, and Sergeant Good was asking, well, can I explain? And the defense attorney said, well, if the prosecutor wants, he can ask you to explain, but I don't need your explanation. I just wanted to know a yes or no answer to this question. So, but that's the point. And this did not happen. The prosecutor should have brought out the incident himself, say, now, there was an incident in 2002, right? All the way back, way back when you were friends with Chris Albert and something happened, and bring it out in a way that's going to help you, but he didn't. But let's go and talk about some of the information that came out on direct examination, and then we'll go over the cross-examination on Sergeant Michael Lank. So what happened is that Sergeant Michael Lank spoke to Jennifer McCabe when he first came on scene for about 8 to 9 minutes. That's what his testimony was. He came into the home at 34 Fairview. This was actually after he sent Jennifer McCabe to go wake them up, which we're going to discuss again a little bit later in cross-examination. And so Jennifer McCabe wakes up the owner, Brian and Nicole Albert, and he testifies it looked like they just woke up. It looked like they were just waking up, getting their bearings when they spoke to him. And they had about a 15 to 20-minute conversation. It came out that he does know Brian Albert as more of like a civil friendship, not a real close friendship, not a friend that he hangs out with or socializes with, but he does know him. He's Chris Albert's brother, so he does know him in that way. He does also know Brian Higgins. He didn't see him initially there, but he did see him later at the residence. And he testified that he did see Lieutenant Gallagher, as we spoke about in yesterday's video on day 5. He did see Lieutenant Gallagher using that leaf blower to clear the area, clear some of the area where John O'Keefe's body was lying, so that they can discover some more evidence. And he also saw the blood there. He saw the cocktail glass, the broken cocktail glass. He also said that he testified that he spoke to Matthew McCabe. Matthew McCabe is Jennifer McCabe's husband, because Matthew McCabe, again, also came to the house. So now you got Matthew McCabe there as well. And he did speak to him also for about 5 minutes. And he went back and forth to that residence about 3 different times that day. And he said everything looked normal in the house. It didn't look like there was any signs of any sort of struggle in the house where he was looking. Now, he did not go into the cellar where the defense is going to be arguing is where this fight happened with John O'Keefe and some of the other people in the house. But he said from where he was standing inside the house, everything looked normal in the house, which again doesn't really say much. They had plenty of time to clean up, even if anything happened on the main floor of the house, but that's what he testified to. Okay, he testified that the cocktail glass and those red plastic solo cups were secured into temporary evidence, and he testified that it is accessible to all officers. So all officers any officer with the Canton Police Department could have access to where the temporary evidence is. He was called back again to 34 Fairview to speak with Jennifer McCabe for another 5 to 10 minutes. Jennifer McCabe wanted to add some information that I guess she didn't tell him the first time around. Now, on February 4th, he went back again to 34 Fairview. This is a few days later, and where he testifies that the conditions has changed. It wasn't as blizzardy. The snow already melted. Rain came through. The temperatures rose, and now it was much more clear around the area. And that is when he was called by Chief Berkowitz to that scene. And what do you know? They found some broken pieces of taillight around the area where John O'Keefe's body was. And what did they do? They called the state police, because at that point the state police were investigating this crime. And he called the state police to secure that evidence that they located a few days later. All right. Now, let's get into the cross-examination of Sergeant Michael Lank. So, the first thing that the defense attorney covers, Alan Jackson, is that he covers about that incident with Chris Albert. We spoke about this in the last video, but we'll quickly go over it again. There was an incident in which Chris Albert was in some sort of fight with some other people in the bar that he was at. He came out to the car in which Sergeant Michael Lank was sitting, and at that time Sergeant Michael Lank was off duty. He was not acting as a police officer at that moment. And then Chris Albert comes and says he's got these people that are making threats to him. They're threatening him and his family, I guess, and he's really nervous. And therefore Michael Lank decides that he's going to insert himself into that situation to protect his friend, Chris Albert. So he gets out of his car. He sees these people walking over to Chris Albert. He says, apparently at some point, he says that he is a police officer and that nothing is going to happen here. We're not going to have any fights. We're not doing this. And everyone just go their own merry way and go home and have a good night's sleep. However, that is not what happened. They ended up into a fist fight. And according to Sergeant Michael Lank, they were the first ones to throw the punch at him. And he responded by defending himself and defending Chris Albert by punching back. Okay, that was his testimony about what happened in that fight. And he called out to the bar owner, the restaurant owner, to call the Canton Police Department, and they did. And eventually the Canton Police Department came down and broke up the fight. So some of these officers actually had to, it seemed from the testimony, pull off Sergeant Michael Lank from punching these other guys or beating up these other guys who were coming officially or allegedly to bully up Chris Albert. So when the officers came, it was already the other way around, where Sergeant Michael Lank was beating them up and they had to pull him off of them. Now, he claims, this is what he testified to, that he was hit first, but no one was arrested. And also, he just happened to not write his report that night, meaning when he did at some point announce himself as a police officer, and then at that point he was acting in color of state law, as we refer to it, or he was acting as as a representative of the Canton Police Department. And then he gets punched in the face, according to his report, according to his testimony. He gets hit first. It's really curious how these people were not arrested that night when the Canton Police Department, his buddies, came and saw what was going on, and he didn't tell them, hey, this guy just attacked a police officer and that they should be arrested on the spot. No, that's not what happened. And this came out in the cross-examination. And what came out was the following, that he did make, at some point, a few days later, a police report, meaning he didn't go right then and there to the police department. He didn't even go the next morning to make a police report about what happened, how these people were attacking him, a police officer, and attacking his friend, Chris Albert. He didn't go and make a report about that, which is very, very curious, which is probably why there was a lawsuit. And again, this is speculation, but there was a settlement in that lawsuit. That lawsuit was not exactly dismissed. And in fact, what happened is that after these people, these alleged aggressors who attacked Sergeant Michael Lank and Chris Albert, after they went the next day to make a complaint against this Sergeant Michael Lank, they went to the Canton Police Department to fill out paperwork complaining against Sergeant Michael Lank, and they were turned away. They weren't able to fill out that report. Then all of a sudden, Sergeant Michael Lank decides to make a police report about what really happened. And then only after that were they allowed to come back and make a complaint about what they believe happened, that actually Sergeant Michael Lank was the aggressor and not them. Now, eventually, which was also brought out in cross-examination, is that whatever these people were charged with from that altercation, that was dismissed. The charges were dismissed. There was no plea deal, it sounds like. It was just completely dismissed, which also suggests that it's not exactly the way that Sergeant Michael Lank said the story happened. Number one, they didn't arrest him right away. Number two, he didn't make the police report right away until they complained about it. And number three, whatever he did put in the report and whatever charges were made against them were later dismissed. So something really fishy about Sergeant Michael Lank's story about those alleged events that happened. All right. So he also brought out the following. He brought out that there were people in the house, and coming back to the scene that Sergeant Michael Lank responded to, the 34 Fairview area. So there were people in the house that were potential witnesses. And he got him to admit, yes, the people in the house would be potential witnesses. And he therefore sent Jennifer McCabe to wake up the people in the house, right? To wake up the homeowners, Brian and Nicole Albert. Now, this is a very big no-no, and every police officer knows it. And they're pretending in this case that they don't understand what's inappropriate about this, because this is something that the defense attorney brought out. He said, do you think it's appropriate to send a potential witness, Jennifer McCabe, to another potential witness, Brian and Nicole Albert, to discuss and talk? You're supposed to seclude witnesses. Everybody knows this. On a crime like this, you're supposed to keep the witnesses separate so that they can't collaborate and get their stories straight. You keep everybody separated. And here you are sending Jennifer McCabe to go wake up the owners, to Nicole and Brian Albert, and for them to have as long of a conversation as they want. So that was certainly not appropriate. Now, another interesting part that came out from his testimony is that they showed a dash cam. They showed him a dash cam. The defense attorney showed Sergeant Michael Lank a dash cam, which shows him on a phone call for about 5 minutes from the time that he already sent Jennifer McCabe to wake up Brian and Nicole Albert. So he sends her to go wake them up. He gets on the phone, and you see him on the phone for about 5 minutes. And he asked him, you have any idea who you're speaking to? And he said, I don't know for sure. So he doesn't know who he's talking to that time. He knows a little bit later he called the state police. But before that time, he had a 5-minute conversation with somebody who he doesn't know. And later it came out and redirect, well, if I had to guess, it would be Lieutenant Gallagher, who already left the scene. Okay. Strange. But he's on the phone for 5 minutes with somebody. And also, he said, what's interesting is that as soon as he's done with the phone call, the lights in 34 Fairview go on. So that is also what he thought was interesting. Now, again, he did send Jennifer McCabe to go wake them up. So at that point, it took a few minutes for them to get up and to turn the lights on. But he's also the defense attorney trying to make some connection between his phone call and somehow the lights going on in the 34 Fairview house, Brian and Nicole Albert's house. And also, again, that gives them 5 minutes, gives Jennifer McCabe 5 minutes to talk to Brian and Nicole Albert about their stories, potentially, if they don't have their stories straight yet. Now, he'd also said that you did say to dispatch that he had trauma to his head. Now, this is Sergeant Michael Lank did not observe John O'Keefe himself. By the time he got to the scene, John O'Keefe was not there anymore. So he must have been told that by somebody. And the only person that he seemed to have spoken to was Jennifer McCabe. So he did have some information from Jennifer McCabe that there was some trauma to John O'Keefe's head, which would suggest a number of possibilities. One of them being a fight. Right? And he got that admission out of Michael Lank as well. That you see that it's possible that it could have been a fight, right? You can't exclude that possibility. And the fight could have come from the home. Right? And then he said, well, yeah, but he believed Jennifer McCabe. He believed Jennifer McCabe's version of the events, that actually John O'Keefe did not come into the house at all. That was Jennifer McCabe's story. And here the defense attorney had a great time because he said, so you come onto a scene, there's a person who's probably dying, John O'Keefe, a Boston police officer, and you speak to one person who's there, who's a potential suspect or a witness, that person tells you one version of the events, and you immediately adopt them and assume that what they're telling you is correct. That doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, how new are you to this job? And then he asked him, have you ever had witnesses lie to you before? And he acknowledged that, yeah, sometimes witnesses will lie to him about a scene. You come onto a crime scene, and some witnesses aren't being truthful to you. Well, that's a possibility. Why didn't you have that possibility that maybe Jennifer McCabe is lying to you about how this happened? But he didn't want, he said that he believed Jennifer McCabe. Now, they talk about, again, the search warrant issue. And this is, again, why didn't you get a search warrant for that house? And here he says, well, again, this is the answer. The answer that they're all giving is that, well, I couldn't get a search warrant because there was no probable cause. Absolutely no probable cause. How in the world can there be probable cause when you have a dead person on the person's lawn who that house invited him to a party? I mean, it's this excuse just doesn't sit well with anybody. You don't think you have probable cause? You're not even going to attempt to ask for a search warrant of that house when there's a very clear version of the events that actually the murder happened in that house, and there's a lot of evidence pointing to that as well. I mean, I'm not saying that the case is over, but there's enough for probable cause. It could be that the house has some information on it. This person was invited to that house. He was found dead on their lawn. At least according to one person, he went into that house. You don't have probable cause? You're not even going to try for probable cause to search that house? Maybe you'll find a sneaker. Maybe you'll find a hat. All right. Well, he said, no, he's certainly not going to fill out an affidavit because he knows for sure that he does not have probable cause to search that house. Just so happens that the house is owned by a Boston police officer, but that has nothing to do with it. All right. And he said that he didn't know at that point that the shoe was missing. And he doesn't know when he found out that there was a missing shoe. He doesn't even know when he found that out. Another thing he asked me, he said, well, you spoke to the people at the house. You went to the house, right? You went to the house 3 times. You spoke to the people in the house for a number of minutes. Did you ask to look through their phones? Maybe someone has some phone calls or text messages. Just ask them. Maybe, can I see your phones? Can I just check your phones, make sure that there was no action on your phones last night? Just to be sure that, your stories are true. Did you even ask to go through the phones? No. Now, here's another part. We all know at this point for sure that Sergeant Michael Lank is very good friends and close friends with Chris Albert. He also, there's a detective that works in the Canton Police Department, Kevin Albert. And now you are the one who's good friends with Chris Albert, knows Kevin Albert very well, probably close friends as well, or friends or friendly, and you're the one interviewing his family. Did you feel that you maybe should discuss that there's a conflict here? And he said it never even crossed his mind. I mean, that wasn't the exact words that he said, but he said no, he never informed anybody about that potential conflict or that actual conflict that he has, that he's investigating a family that he's very close with, or at least close with some of the people in that family. So, again, that was a good point that he brought out. Another part that he brought out is that when he was actually conducting the interviews, so it's one thing when you send a witness, Jennifer McCabe, to go and get Brian and Nicole Albert. It's another thing if you're going to interview them all together in the same kitchen area or wherever they were standing in the house. You're talking to all 3 people at the same time. I mean, that's certainly not protocol. And the only way that you think to get away with this is because this is a Boston police officer and his family. And you're not being honest and serious about your job. You can't interview 3 people at the same time and ask them all questions which they can all hear how each other answers those questions. And he brought out that all the times they were all there when he was asking them these questions. Now, after 8 o'clock in the morning, that scene, that crime scene in front of 34 Fairview was unsecured. It wasn't secured. And now, what do you know? A few days later, all of a sudden, there's extra evidence that is found on that lawn. There is no way of telling, no way of knowing how that broken taillight got there, right? I mean, that's pretty clear at this point. It could have been there from before. it just happened. It could have been there from before, and none of the police officers discovered it. But the fact that all of a sudden there's a discovery a few days later, and the entire scene was unsecured beforehand, at least as it relates to the evidence that was found at that scene, certainly reasonable doubt about whether that evidence was planted or was there from before. It's a good question. How did that evidence get there when nobody caught it the first time? Yes, there was a lot of snow. Who knows what happened in between? All right. Well, another thing that he brought out was that he showed him that picture of those red plastic cups which gathered the blood in front of the house and was in a Stop and Shop brown paper bag. And he said, doesn't look like anything has any sort of evidence tape over it. And he seemed to be, again, Sergeant Michael Lank seemed to be a little confused about what does he mean by evidence tape. And he explained to him, well, when you have evidence, you tape it up and you have a signature. And then when you want to untape it, you don't just untape it, you cut it. And then when you retape it, you sign it again. Does that look like there's any evidence of that in that brown paper bag? And very clearly, there's no evidence of that at all. And he said, essentially, this is Michael Lank's response, that he's not really even aware of evidence tape. And he said, hold on a second. You've been a police officer for 20 years, and you don't understand how this evidence tape works? Again, very, very curious. So on redirect, the first thing that the prosecutor tried to do was rehabilitate him about that entire story and give a positive spin on it. And again, like I said, at this point, it's not too late to try to give a spin on it, but it's certainly much better practice that when the first time the jury hears something, they should hear it in a positive light to your client and your case, and not the way that the prosecutor did it here. All right. He also brought out the fact that, look, you live in Canton your entire life, or most of your life, and you respond to many different scenes and things going on in the community, and with people that obviously right? So you deal with people that you know all the time. And we have to assume that you're not going to give every single person that you know preferential treatment here. So essentially he's trying to bring out that, okay, just the fact that you're close friends with Chris Albert and Calvin Albert works on the police force, and these happen to be friends or family of theirs, that doesn't mean that you're going to give them different treatment, even though it seems to be clear that there was different treatment given to these people. And then he said, okay, would you guess who you were on the phone with? And that's when he said he guessed, yeah, maybe I was on the phone that 5-minute time where he couldn't remember who he was on the phone with during cross-examination. And then he said, yeah, I was probably on the phone, or if I had to guess, I was on the phone with Lieutenant Gallagher. All right. And then on recross, which was the final thing that left in the jury's mind, was the fact that he said, even though you claim that you were assaulted by this Mark and Alfredo, they were never convicted of anything. And there was actually a question about whether that was actually going to come in, but the door was open, and therefore the defense attorney was able to bring that out, that these people that you claim were the aggressors in that story actually were never convicted of anything. And also he said something to the fact that he claimed, Sergeant Michael Lank claimed, that these aggressors who came by that fight that he had in 2002 defending Chris Albert, these people actually came over to him and said, we know who you are, and we don't give an F. That's what his testimony was. So in response to that, the defense attorney said, are you sure that that's what happened? And not that was it. What was actually said is that you, Sergeant Michael Lank, said to them that I don't know who you are, but I am going to make your life miserable. You sure you didn't say that part? Because that's what their allegations were in their complaint, which eventually settled for an undisclosed amount and a confidential amount. So another strong way to finish off his cross-examination. All right, and at the end of the day, just started with another Canton Police Department Lieutenant, Charles Ray, which we're probably going to hear more about in tomorrow's tomorrow's day of trial, which is going to be day number 7 in the Karen Reed trial. Well, that is the recap for today in the Karen Reed trial, day number 6. And we are going to be continuing following this very, very interesting case. Thank you for watching. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, like, and we will see you next time.